The pandemic has brought not only the virus, but a massive and even more viral infodemic, and this culture of misinformation and public distrust. So I think this conversation is so important and relevant right now. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which myself and today's audience is located. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians that may be present online. So I'm going to start with a couple of housekeeping notes. This session marks the second last MLL event for the VCCC that we'll be hosting this year. The VCCC has an amazing speaker coming up for the final session this year. That is Associate Professor Carla Goff, who will be presenting on patient-reported outcomes in routine clinical care and the key steps in the roadmap to implementation. So please register your interest via the website. And the program for 2021 will be announced in the new year. We also have a learning page if you would like to view any of the other topics. So today's session is meant to be an interactive work-stop-shell session. So if you have any questions or comments, please raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you. You can also turn on your camera, and it is encouraged that you do so, given that it's a smaller group and an interactive session. Alternatively, you can comment in the chat section and we will try to get to all of your questions, but we do encourage you to get involved however you feel comfortable. This topic area, to get the most out of it, your input is greatly appreciated and encouraged and valued to have a stimulating session. So I'm now very pleased to introduce our very special guest today, Jon Yeo, who is an executive coach who helps leaders articulate strategic messages in meaningful ways. Known for his ability to articulate the complex simply, Jon works with CEOs and senior leadership teams to build trust, empathy, and engagement in an increasingly distracted world. He works with brands including Salesforce, SAP, Australia Post, MYOB, University of Melbourne, DHSS, and DET. Jon is on the board of members of Professional Speakers Australia and is a current licensee of TEDx Melbourne, where he works with over 50 volunteers to produce large events and prepares speakers for some of the most watched and critiqued speaking videos in the world today. Today, Jon will be speaking on the importance and value of science communication, especially in the post-COVID era. Welcome, Jon. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Sat. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here. Hi, everyone. Glad to spend some time with you this afternoon. I know it's lunchtime. Hopefully, you are also enjoying a bite. Today, we're really going to be talking about how we effectively communicate and how we influence, especially in this era where there's a lot of signal to noise ratio mismatch between the fake news and what we call real science. Well, not what we know is real science. I have, for the past 10 years, as Sat mentioned, been running TEDx Melbourne. So I've worked with a number of researchers many times from the University of Melbourne staff around how we influence and engage, particularly when the need for information and accurate information is higher than ever, but the attention span for that information is lower than ever. And so what we need to do is find that balance between the sophistication or the depth or the complexity of your knowledge, but also do it in a meaningful way, an engaging way that builds trust amongst our community. We've got a situation now where the age of the expert is largely Google. And so most people are quite happy to Google expertise, and they probably don't know that many experts. And so our job is to become known in that space, to influence in that space, and to also do it in short periods of time at a language level that they can understand. And these are some of the things that we're going to be exploring today, so that you can not only become more effective as a communicator, but stronger as a brand, whether that's an individual or organization, to build the reputation that allows people to consider you as a credible resource, an authoritative resource, and a valuable resource. And so that cut through, that ability to build that soundbite, that ability to establish the professionalism of your particular area of expertise is as important as the knowledge that you have. It was probably, not that long ago where people would basically just look for an expert and treat that as the font of all knowledge. And I think with Google these days, people are less likely to do that, simply because the access and the conversations out there are so prevalent. Particularly in most recent times with COVID, the signal to noise ratio has been remarkably disproportionate. And I think as as communicators and science communicators, our role and opportunity there is to really make our mark in that space. So I encourage you throughout this entire session to throw questions in the chat. If you've got anything that you have regarding what I'm going to present, I'm going to put some slides up in a moment, very, very few, but some important ones. And also towards the end, we'll also have some time for some Q&A so we can deep dive into some maybe more complex conversation pieces that you might want to unpack or explore regarding the model or regarding your knowledge and how we might make that all work. So let me just fire up the share screen for a moment and we can go from there. Okay, so what we have is science communication in a post-COVID era. And what's really going to get interesting as times move on, as we get more used to hybrid situations or virtual situations, is that we need to be able to influence not only in person, but online. And how do we do that in such a way that people are paying attention and not, I don't know, checking their phone or their email or any other distractions that we currently have in a digital world. And so what we need to do is then become expert at influencing just as much as expert in our knowledge. And so what we're going to do is work out what that balance that needs to be. What is the relevance that we need to have in terms of how we engage, to what degree do we engage, to what level of detail do you engage, and the engagement you have, your ability to hold someone's attention. Now, if you take it at the two extremes, the people who are absolute experts at anything are typically, you know, researchers, teachers, lecturers, etc. Historically, they don't have a history of being memorable. Now, there's always exceptions to that rule, but if you could remember every single thing that you learnt at school and every single class, then you've either got a brilliant mind or you had amazing, amazing practitioners of their of communication, because you know their expertise is pure knowledge. Now, knowledge does not drive behavior change. For instance, everyone knows you should eat well, do lots of exercise, almost no one does it. So knowing something and doing something are completely different things. And how you engage someone, how you get their attention, how do you keep their attention, how do you maintain their attention, then becomes a skill set in and of itself. That's the engagement end of the equation. And engagement is typically the domain of people in performing arts, so actors, musicians, comedians, etc. Really, really good at holding our attention. Not so expert at necessarily teaching anyone anything, and that's because that's not in their remit. You know, once their gig is over, the movie's over, their play's over, their whatever is over, they can go on their merry way. And so how do we then blend those two? And I think TED as a brand has been reasonably good at getting expertise and engagement and blending them in a very special way. And some of those insights are some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today. When we're talking about communication, we're really functioning, well, I focus on three specific areas. The content itself. Now, content is important. It is not king, as some people say, because if content was king, then everything that you saw in social media would be relevant, timely, and needed to be actioned straight away. Clearly, that's not the case. So content, while is really, really important, I wouldn't go so far as it's king. I would say it's minimum. If you don't have good content, people will walk pretty quickly because there are so many choices you can have to go find better information. The next thing that people really need to understand is context, which is the nature of why we're coming together. Are they coming together because it's an urgency that they need to discover right now? Are they doing it just because they're genuinely curious? Are they doing it because they just happen to, you know, they happen to sort of have a general familiarity and want to get better? Like, each of those things determine the degree by which they're interested in learning more and growing and evolving in terms of the knowledge that you can share. And so the different contexts can directly influence their ability to absorb that information. Even time of day can be a context. For instance, it's much, much easier to have a conversation first thing on a Monday morning than at 4:55 as they're trying to rush out the door. So even time of day can make an impact in terms of when is a good time to release information. And, you know, the timing of the release of that information can also be really, really important, because obviously you don't want the right information at the wrong time, or the wrong information too late. And so our job is to how we build that trust and rapport over time so that where you become known as the expert, when they do need it, they come straight to you. And so that context is really around setting the scene, not only while you're presenting, but before the presentation even happens. So our brand, our credibility then becomes critical pieces to the communication piece. And then the final part that I feel that is often lost in communication is our intention. No one likes to be sold to at a family barbecue. The intention is wrong. And so if our intention is not matched with the expectation of the listener, then that mismatch can cause dissonance, a bit of friction or distrust. And so, that's why, being sold at the wrong time or lectured at the wrong time then becomes a hurdle to your credibility and also your listenability, if that's such a word, in terms of them relating to you as a human being. Do they trust you? Have you built rapport with them? What's the credibility? What's the context which you come in together? Is that domain expertise relevant in this particular moment? Are all measured in facts around your intention. And so our ability to build that trust and rapport, to build that relationship, then becomes a critical piece. Because if you have the best content in the world at the right time, but they don't trust you as an individual or as a communicator or as a brand, then you have some challenges. A really good example is banking at the moment. Royal Commission going on, so no one in the industry is seen in the same light as they were seen maybe 20 years ago. And so these sorts of things, these external factors, can influence whether someone believes you or trusts you or wants to believe you. And so our ability to manage through that scenario is just as important. So let's have a bit of a play with this in a little bit more. Let's have an understanding of how we have the mastery of these things, the who, what, how, and why. Now, if we had 26 hours, these would be all the things I'd be playing with. But clearly, that's not an option. So we'll just kind of pick a piece of it and we'll unpack from there. But I believe it's a good foundational piece. It's really important in terms of expert communicator in a meaningful or engaging or relevant way. And so our skill set around that really functions around these things and these skill sets. We're going to play with something called the intention architecture. And the intention architecture allows us to map our knowledge, our intention, and our capability with the knowledge, experience, and background of the listener to make sure that there's a connection, a resonance. So let's start with the obvious, the audience. Who are you speaking to? What do they know? How do they make the decisions? What's distracting them at the moment? What are their priorities? What's their level of expertise? These are all factors that we need to consider when we're starting out our conversation. Again, an extreme example, if you had to do a presentation this afternoon, for instance, the topic, I don't know, what do you do at work? The way you explain that to a kindergarten kid, what do you do at work, versus the chair of the board, what are you doing at work, are completely different things. So our need to know the audience is very, very high. Now, if you've got a mixed audience or an unknown audience or even an audience you can't see, that becomes the art. And we can talk a little bit about that, but this is the art of where this model, I feel, becomes really, really helpful. So let's keep moving and we can discuss this in the interactive component. So the next part is obviously your message. What are you going to say? What are the components? What is the order? What language or language complexity or language depth do you need to have? These are all important factors in order to match our knowledge and experience and background with their knowledge and experience and background. So the meeting of the minds becomes at an even level, at a peer level or a considered friend level. Obviously, if it's a classroom, teacher-student relationship can also be a factor there. But if you're speaking with the general public, they could be anywhere on these spectrums. And so you've got to be able to be mindful of that and to be able to evaluate that very quickly and respond appropriately. And that's again, why this model was created. So we can have a play with that in a second. The next one is really around your individual credibility, how you build trust rapport. It's not a biography, although those components help, but it's about how do people relate to you as the expert? Are you approachable? Are you authoritative? Do you have credibility? Are all elements that you build at an individual level. And then overlapping that is what organization do you work for? If they've heard of your organization, it's easier to build that trust and rapport. it's kind of like saying, you know, if I said, I don't know, Disney or Apple or maybe Tesla, you have a different visceral response to those brands than you would to any of their competitors. And so that can precede you from an expectation point of view in terms of how you set up the message. And so our ability to build that organizational brand position over time then becomes a critical element when the time comes to land the most important message. And then, as I mentioned before a little bit, environment. What's the nature of our coming together? Is this an emergency update that they desperately want to hear about? Have you met someone randomly in the street and you want to communicate what's going on? Is this a formal meeting? If it's a formal meeting, is it a first-time meeting? Is it a continuing, an ongoing conversation or a continuing conversation? These are all the components that shape what your starting point for the conversation, but also shape the degree by which the audience is willing to listen or wanting to listen. And so those environmental factors can really impact your credibility. As I mentioned, the Royal Commission with banking can really unpack or even unseat your credibility. And so knowing these 5 areas or 5 levels then become, I would say, foundational components to make sure you're building that relationship. Now, here's my experience. If you miss one, there's a gap. And if there's a gap, there's doubt. It's kind of like me saying, I'm going to give you a brand new car. But something you have to know, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that the brakes are going to totally, absolutely fail. Then we have a challenge, you know, then we have a little bit of doubt. And then we don't quite trust the car to the same degree. And if you have that gap like that, that can undermine your credibility, especially over the long term, but definitely in the moment. And so our ability to fill that gaps, that one of those in the 5 levels, means that we're making sure that we're minimizing the possibility of a gap forming. So it's kind of like creating a watertight argument. How do you cover all the angles of possibilities? Now, when I work with senior executives, we'll spend 3 days on these 5 words. Now, we don't have time to do that now, but let's have a bit of an experiment with that. Let's have a play with this. So let's workshop this a little bit. I want you to pick an audience, whether it's a real one or a hypothetical one, I don't mind, but pick 1 or 2 things that you know about them. And I want you to write that down. This is the exercise I want you to start now. Just do it now by yourself, because what I might do, or what I will do, is call on some of you to share some of these points. And we can make a little micro narrative, something that takes 90 seconds or less, that's compelling and engaging. So that's the challenge for us today. So that's the audience. 2 things you know about them. Then message, 2 things you want to say to them. Then individual, 2 things you want to say about you. Now, it might be your role or title, but it might be also something that helps us to understand or relate to you. So I was working with someone the other day. He grew up in Jerusalem, and his father was the head of the special forces. Now, of course, therefore, he was brought up in a very disciplined background. And so that forms the basis of how he approaches all his problem solving. So, you know, sometimes a little bit of a background can give you an understanding of how someone thinks or how someone solves a problem that might be contextually relevant to the matter at hand, the conversation at hand. So 2 things about you as an individual, 2 things about the organization you work for. So that might be its vision, its mission, it might be what it stands for, it might be its beliefs, it might be its brand, it might be its product or industry. Just pick a couple of things. By the way, there's no right or wrong here, but just pick 1 or 2 things that you feel would be interesting to talk about. And then 2 things about the environment. Why are you coming together? Is this a formal announcement? Is this a general announcement? You know, what's the nature of the coming together? Write 1 or 2 things about that. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to create a little micro narrative around that. So I'm going to give you, I don't know, a couple of minutes to do that. There is no right or wrong. If you want to write more than 2, that's fine. If you don't have anything coming to your head, maybe let's chat about that. But make sure that you've got at least 2 things in each of those areas, and we'll use that as a template. like I said, when I work with senior executives, we'll spend 3 days unpacking this, and clearly it's more than 2 bullet points. But for the purpose of time and this exercise, that should be sufficient. In the meantime, has anyone got any questions about the levels? Because I'm happy to answer those, but I'm going to call on one of you to volunteer your little bullet points, and we're going to create a little micro narrative or a little story around it. And so you see how this tool works. So there's about a minute left, so I'm going to sort of pause for the time being and let you reflect. I think it's really important that you write at least something down, even have a go, so that you can see how, not only see the model works, but see how we can use it in your particular context, in your particular life. Because I really believe that this is something you can take into meetings, you can take into just general random conversations, you can take this into formal presentations. There's multiple ways you can use these 5 levels. Okay, we're about done for the 2 minutes. But I'm just wondering, is there someone feeling brave enough to volunteer their bullet points? And let's help you create a little narrative around this, a compelling little story. Who would like to go first? Who's feeling brave? Or do I get to pick a lucky winner and randomly select someone? Oh, there's some chat. So Justine, environment is, what's the nature of the coming together? Is this a general announcement that no one's expecting that you want to share? Is this a formal meeting where something has been set up? If it is a formal meeting, is it a first-time meeting, or is it a continuing conversation? What's the nature of the conversation, and what's impacting that conversation? Sometimes it's an emergency meeting, and therefore people have a higher motivation to engage and listen and collaborate versus just a regular weekly meeting. So those sorts of things also become environmental factors. So Ariadne, is that Ariadne? Sorry.
Yeah, Ariadne, also known as Arrow.
Okay. Hey, Arrow. Thanks
Hello.
for volunteering.
No worries. Thought I'd give it a go.
Great. Would you like to start, actually start at either end? Which end would you like to, maybe start at the audience? Tell me who you're speaking to and we'll work our way up the...
All right. I'll say I'm going to be speaking to people working in medicine, so medical professionals.
Sure.
And I'm jumping ahead already. So that's my audience.
Yep.
Message is going to be the importance of comms and community engagement for behavior change.
Yeah.
Or specifically, let's go really specific here and drill down, for vaccination uptake.
Okay, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Individual, something about myself, 2 points. Was one of the engagement workers on Premier's department and cabinet. And prior to that, a little bit of fun as well, creative lead in London agencies, as well as head of multimedia for the Sunday Times and newspaper hack.
Oh, wow.
Bit of a Swiss Army knife, they call me. And what's the next point? Organisation. Well, I guess I work at the Uni Melb, Faculty of Medicine.
Right. Gotcha.
And the environment is COVID-19 vaccines about to land. There's a lot of webinars that I'm seeing that has immunologists and medical professionals, and not one have I seen community engagement or comms professionals in those discussions.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And I wonder to what degree they've been given media training as opposed to being a researcher who suddenly get put in front of a camera. I think we'll get mixed results depending on their degree of confidence there.
I think, yeah, but I think beyond that, if you think visuals, right? So, you know, I'm the social media and content lead for the faculty. One of the things I notice is just even the selection of images, a lot of news articles, even our own, you know, myself, I've been guilty of it before, quickly snapping a photograph of a baby with a needle. Now that needle's has a negative connotation, and there are other ways of presenting visually that are less sort of, I guess, negative.
Yeah, no, I got you. So let me just sort of recap here, just in case I've written it down wrong. Medical, so you're speaking to other medical community members, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
and what do you want them to do?
I want them to, I guess, a bit of systems change. I want to disrupt a little bit and have more comms and engagement working side by side with medical professionals.
Okay. Gotcha.
And being part of the discussion very early on.
Yep. Okay. See, that's a critical one.
Yeah, I think that's the main objective, actually. The main objective would be engaging comms and engagement professionals at day one.
Okay. All right. So sometimes I like to do this. This is a bit of a framework. So some people kind of start at the bottom and work their way up. Some people start at the top and work their way down. You can do that. You don't have to. There's a reason why you would, and I'll explain that afterwards, but not necessarily. So for you, given your knowledge, your unique background, I'm going to just sort of lean on that a little bit and work with that. So it might go, let me just quickly reflect on this. Oh, by the way, your role at the Department of Premier and Cabinet, what was that? I didn't capture the end of that.
So I was the engagement and comms officer, and we won a whole bunch of awards for digital engagement as well as actual face-to-face engagement.
All right, great.
And it was the biggest engagement initiative for the state of Victoria, and ridiculous deadlines.
Okay, all right. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I know, it was manic. But that was part of the innovation department. Maybe that's something to note as well, that I've always worked in innovation teams.
All right. Yes, innovation. Okay, thank you. So it might be something along the lines of, I've worked with communication experts all the way from marketing to the Department of Premier and Cabinet, where timing and the nuance of way that communication is made is really, really important. And so in this day of COVID, where everyone's looking for safety, everyone's looking for fear, everyone's looking for a level of not only trust, but they also want to get back to life. And we suddenly have this opportunity with a vaccine to make that difference. And the challenge we have is, when do we do it? How do we do it? And how we build the trust and rapport of the communities we serve. And so my time in these areas, one of the things that's really made the difference is early and effective communication, not only internally in the way we position and brand ourselves, but also how we engage with our communities. Because out there, everyone's looking for the quick solution, the quick pill. And if we react rather than respond credibly, it won't necessarily paint the best light on our organization. Now, if we're to be effective, we need to do it well. We need to be coordinated. We need to position ourselves as thought leaders in the space so that when the time comes, the opportunity is there to really make our mark. If we're serious about being a distinctive message in the community rather than also ran, it starts with the planning. And so here's our biggest opportunity. We really should start now.
Love it. I wish I'd recorded that. I hope this is being recorded, because I'll just be grabbing this out, folks.
Yeah, so I think it was recorded. I think the record button is on. But
awesome.
If not, I'll give you my email. We can have another crack at it. It's not that complicated, as long as you don't fill the gaps. I did miss the innovation bit, and I would sort of weave that through next time. But what we're really doing is we're taking the components and we're trying to create a psychological narrative in the listener's mind of when to say the right thing at the right time and the right person in the right way. And so while that's a little bit of an art, the components in and of themselves, you already produced. The key elements we already determined. It was just a question of what order did we want to put that so that it landed in the right way. I see a few things coming on. Oh yeah, we are recording, so that is good for you. And Jennifer says it's a great case study. I'm sure a lot of you are kind of seeing messages like that, where the signal to noise is pretty disproportionate, and we need to be able to cut through. So considered, authoritative, credible, clear, supportive, then becomes the intents underneath the message that we need to paint. And we do that with our voice, we do it with our language, and we do it in a way that makes sense for the listener as opposed to makes sense for the expert.
Totally. One of the things I talk about is pathological empathy, having empathy for the audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're missing that, you know, the intention's just gone. But thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure. Thank you. Really enjoying this discussion. Awesome.
Great. Great. Does anyone have any questions about that experience or what happened there? So Geraldine's got interested to hear what you think about the way that allegedly influential persons, thinking of Pete Evans, employs intention framework and a 3-ball model, gets the airplay, but is it influential? That's a really good question, Geraldine. First of all, you can't be influential unless you're getting attention. So you could argue that the first part of the equation is the essential part, and then the credibility and the longevity then needs to be painted into that picture. And this is where I think the science communication that you have is the long-term play. You know, the science and the credibility and the rigor underneath that has to sustain this message. Otherwise, you will be blown out by the people who are really good at just throwing firecrackers into the crowd. You know, I don't know how long Pete's going to be around for, but science was always going to be around. And so if you're playing that long-term game, if the brand and position and the credibility is there, then you have the opportunity to have the more meaningful conversation with the community at large. Now, Pete has been effective in building that community over time so that almost anything he says gets heard because he's got the foundations, the base to build on. And so the question I ask for you or your organization is, do you have that consistent credibility? Do you have that long-term play? Have you built that community rapport? How have you established it? Or if you already established it, how are you maintaining it? Because if you're not, then people like Pete will always come in and take the wind out of your sails. And so I think it's really, really important now more than ever for us as science organizations to be building that credibility over time. So that, like I said, when the message to land needs to go out there, it's already established. And so I think Pete has been clever in setting himself up. And I think that that's the opportunity for science communicators in general. Long answer, sorry. But it's a bit nuanced. There's a couple of layers in there. Does anyone else want to share their bullet points or have any questions about the model overall? Or maybe what other people are doing? Okay, so the other question, and I'm just going to sort of preempt a couple of things while someone's thinking about being a bit brave, but the other thing that we need to be good at is effective online or effective to camera. And so these are some of the skills that you might not have had in the past. The number of Zoom meetings obviously has gone through the roof. The ability to influence virtually is actually going to be kind of arguably a permanent addition to our office engagement or a professional engagement, sorry. And so I think we need to be able to do that and do that effectively. And so that's an additional skill set that we probably don't have that I think everyone in this room should probably get their handle on basically from now onwards. Because if you're not, then it can undermine the impact the message has. And it's the impact that you need to have just as much as the data and science and logic underneath it. Who else would like to share their bullet points? Here's an opportunity here to really see how your message might work out there. There is no right or wrong. And you know, if it's incomplete, we can unpack it. Don't worry about that part. But who wants to at least have a crack? By the way, if you've got a question, you can throw it in the chat as well. No one. So I'm in a room of communicators that don't want to communicate.
Jon, I'll have a go.
Hey, Thomas. Thank you.
My question, though, before I go into it is,
sure.
I think a lot of the people in this group are almost the people behind the people. So it's our job to be lining up the opportunities and pitching out the stories for our researchers to actually do the messaging. So I think that might be where some of the hesitancy is coming from.
That makes sense. Well, okay.
But I've got a question, so I'm going to ask my question or my scenario on behalf of the people who are going to be doing this messaging for us.
Sure.
So our audience is general public at large, but specifically families who are welcoming a new baby into the world and new mothers who have literally just given birth in a hospital setting in Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in their hospital room, essentially, with the baby in the crib.
Sure.
The message is that we're inviting these families and these mothers to partake in a longitudinal study, which will track the health and well-being of their child and the family for essentially the rest of their lives. And if the money is forthcoming.
Sure.
And so at this point, I'm not sure whether you want the individual background of me or the people who are going to be doing the actual recruiting, like that I'm guessing they would tailor that message.
Yeah.
Depending on
so
who they are.
Pick the messenger then, not yourself.
Yeah.
And that can be hypothetical for this exercise. To be honest, the content is less important. What I want you to do is understand the dynamic between the layers, not necessarily that this information is technically correct or not.
Yeah.
Because that will change.
Yeah. So the people delivering this message, I don't think they will be nurses as such. They will be recruiters who've come in from the Institute. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether they'll have a health practice background, whether they, are, ex-nurses or,
sure.
But they will be certainly researchers familiar with the project.
Mm-hmm.
The organisation is the Institute, but we're also partnering with the various hospitals where the women are giving birth.
Yep.
And that will go statewide early next year.
Yep.
So from that point of view, the hospitals are very much, acute clinical care. You're in the hospital for 2 or 3 days while you've given birth, and then hopefully they don't see you again.
Yeah.
And whereas we're a research institute and our mission is to put children at the heart of everything that we do, and we're really infant, child, adolescent focused institute. And we're looking to ensure the health and well-being of every child born in Victoria and make this generation the healthiest generation so far, which is challenging in the current environment, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And the environment, as I said before, will be, new mothers who've just given birth. They're lying in their beds, recuperating from a fairly traumatic experience. And the baby's just been born. It's a bit of a blurry period. I was talking with a colleague just earlier this morning. We were reflecting on when our kids were born, and we were sort of joking that you could just come in and ask parents to do anything at this point, and they'll probably just sign on the dotted line and say, yep, just do whatever. And we were thinking about all the different things that happened when the kids were born, and the hearing test and the vitamin injections and the first immunization and stuff. You just do it. I don't have bandwidth to think about this at the moment. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I hear you. I got 2 kids. I remember all those times. Okay. So it might be along the, and I'm assuming this is the first time you've met the parents or the mother or is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be the first time that the individual in the room has met them. There is going to be a sort of awareness raising campaign in the lead up to this. So hopefully it's not the first time that the parents have ever heard of the project. Presumably and hopefully they will have seen a poster in the GP's office when they've gone in for their prenatal appointments. They will have seen it on their social feeds. They might have seen a TVC. or read some media
Right.
in their newspaper or television channel of choice, but it will be the first time there's face-to-face contact. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So if it's the first time, I'm just going to preempt and sort of make some assumptions about our first connection, and we'd need to adapt. And this is a thing, like all tools, you need to adapt it to your scenario. But we're picking hypothetical ones. So I'm going to pick a particular scenario based on what you just said. So it might be something along the level. Firstly, congratulations. This has got to be a most wonderful time. You know, your baby, boy or girl, whichever one it is, you know, is such a treasure. And I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 questions about what to do in this scenario. Now, I get this is probably a little bit overwhelming, that there's new experience, new emotion, new person in the world. And so what we'd like to do is ask you something that's a little bit different. Rather than ask you something specifically about your child, what we'd like to do is work towards creating the healthiest generation Victoria's ever seen. Would you be interested in being part of that? What we're actually going to do is do a longitudinal study about you and your family and track that over time to make sure that we're capturing the right moments to create the healthiest opportunity moments in their life. Now, you might need to word that a little bit differently because I don't know what the actual study does. So what we're really looking for, are they volunteers, by the way?
Yeah, so this is all opt-in.
Okay, all right. So what we're looking for is volunteers to be part of that grand vision, to be something a bit bigger than what's going on here. But we're also looking for someone to contribute to that bigger picture. We'd love you to be part of that. What do you think? And then you can probably go from there. You know, I don't think the blurb needs to be terribly long or lengthy, because if you did, that would just be more they'd have to observe, you know, sort of take in. You could then sort of weave in the bits around, you know, it's with institutes and hospitals, or, you know, actually I probably would have added children at heart because it was a phrase that you used, but I really like the sentiment of that. The intention underneath that is good. And so that's a good way to build the relationship with the rapport as well. But does that make sense? How you just sort of, I sort of peppered it with different elements so that they all sort of came together at the end.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of elements that are in the existing social campaign that'll be hitting the airwaves soon. So it's good to just get some reassurance that we're on the right track with the alignment.
Right. Well, it's good. You obviously clearly explained it well as well, because I couldn't have done that without your help. We've got Averly saying, great study. Are there ethics considerations around informed consent of signing people up, you know, in brackets, in quotes, vulnerable time? Credibility of the study will be very important for this one. I think that's more a technical question about the study than the conversation, but I don't know if, Thomas, you have an answer for that one.
I was just typing in the chat, but yeah, it is obviously something that's very, very top of mind for the research team, especially coming off the disaster that was the My Health record from a couple of years ago now, and the concerns that people, you know, the very valid concerns that people have around their data and their privacy.
Yeah.
What we have going in our favour is that none of the data is actually accessible by governments. It's all being held by institutions that, coming back to your point from before about reputation, you know, the Royal Children's Hospital, Medical Children's Research Institute, the various other hospitals that are involved, and medical researchers have a much higher, I think, reputation than perhaps some government agencies. So there's that. In terms of the ethics around signing up people at a vulnerable time, the study's gone through, you know, all of the ethical hoops that you can imagine. So it has been signed off by the experts. I'm not sure actually if people who've got kids in NICU, for example, would also be eligible to be part of the study, or whether that's just a sort of a bridge too far. I think that they will be, because obviously it's a population that you need to capture as well, and to track their long-term outcomes. So yeah, but whether that's built into the approach to the families at all, I'm not sure about. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Look, I guess diffusing the argument for the My Health record might come up in the conversation. My personal view with My Health record, it was the first at scale and significant project of its type, which was kind of going against it because there wasn't a precedent in the minds of the community. I also don't think they communicated at a foundational level the nature, the significance, the value of what was happening and why it would add value to everyone involved, and how it was done in an appropriate and a secure way. And it was more like, to me, it felt like, oh, my health record, you've got 90 days to sign up or opt out or something. It's like, hang on a minute, where did this come from? For me, it felt very sudden. And so if they'd maybe socialized that a lot earlier, I think it might have had a better chance of kind of not getting the impact, the reaction it got. But I don't know, it's easy to say this stuff in hindsight.
Yeah, and I mean, the key difference is that this is opt-in rather than opt-out. So
yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah,
big difference. Thanks, Tom, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Does anyone else want to have a share? Are there any contexts I might have missed, to Tom's point, around what you're currently have in front of you, and why you may be sort of a little bit reluctant to share? Or is it just because you're digesting? Give me a sense of what's going on here. Hi, Geraldine.
Hi there. I've just got to start my video. Hello. Oh, there you are. Hi. So the example, thanks for answering that question too about our friend I keep thinking he'll just stop, but he just won't. The thing, my example is it's just basically pretty lame, which is what's held me back in, because the first example was so very good and global, and mine's really local, and pretty tiny. But I'll give it a go if nobody else wants to.
Sure.
So I run a research week at a metropolitan hospital in Melbourne, which is like an internal conference. And what I would like to do is improve the way that I let people know that it's coming up and get them to participate better. So the audience are the scientists that are associated with the hospital and its associated research institutes, and the doctors and the medical students and the nursing students. In fact, really the whole professional clinical staff of the hospital. The messages, and they're interested in each other and what each other does. I think that's the two things there. The message that I was wanting to get across to them was that this internal, thing's on, and that the participation has valuable aspects for them personally. And the information about me is I've been doing it for a little while, and it's always really just confrontingly good to see what people do. The organisation is a healthcare organisation, and they strongly believe that research directs the best care for people. And it's an annual event, and you can sort of come along if you want to. That's completely free and it's completely voluntary. So that's my little scenario.
Okay.
Be really interested to see how you go.
Sure. So do these different groups within the organisation typically interact or engage with each other, or do they pretty much sort of head down, bum up, and just try and get through their day?
Pretty much working on their own projects, and there's a little bit of sharing, but it's pretty focused. Yeah.
And when you say confrontingly good, is that? Tell me a bit more about that.
So when all people's abstracts come in, we get lots of them, like more than 150 each year, and I get to read them all, and I think amazing. The stuff that people do at this place is just I'm no PhD in the NH and MRC or anything, but the sort of work that they're doing appears to be really valuable and really person-centered, and I'm proud to read it. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Wonderful. Would you be comfortable quoting something that someone said in terms of feedback?
Yeah. So people say that it gives them a great opportunity to get to know what other people down the corridor are doing. That's generally the précis of the feedback.
Okay. All right, great. And historically, are you just trying to build awareness, or has there been a reticent and you're trying to build up? Like, what's the starting point?
I guess I'm just trying to build. So there's a base level of awareness, and then there's always people who go, "Oh, I didn't even know that was on." And it's, you know, we've been doing it for 30 years.
Okay.
It's not novel.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe let me just have a reflect on these notes here for a sec, and I'll come up with something.
And I apologise for the posters in the kids' bedroom.
It's okay. So it might be something like, you'd think after 30 years we'd worked it all out. But what we continually realize is that the more that people get together, the more they engage, the more that they spend time with each other, the more they experience not only the amazingness, but the resourcefulness and credibility of all the people in our community. Yeah. We have some amazing talent, and we want to make sure that you see it. So over the next week, we're going to do a free opt-in option to collaborate and connect with like-minded individuals in all facets of life. And in fact, people have said, pick example here and pick example there. Yeah, we really feel this is going to make a difference, not only to your life materially, but also experientially, about how you engage, how you connect, and how you remedy solutions within our hospitals' institutions. We might discover a new way to engage. We might learn something new. We might grow and be more strategic together. These are all benefits that people have said have come out of this event. 30 years can't be wrong. It has a history of getting it done well. And here's the opportunity for you to really sink your teeth in and take your profession or your experience or your knowledge to another level.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's really interesting to see how your mind works. Thank you.
That's all right. So the key there is I'm thinking about the psychology of where they're at and where they're going. I'm thinking about the degree of resistance that they potentially might have.
Yes.
I'm trying to create something that's remarkable in that, in the sense that it appeals to their sensibilities.
Yeah.
Now, an extreme way to do that is to appeal to, is to catalyze or polarize them. Now, that's not appropriate for every scenario, but you know, you have to choose what degree you need to go below that if that's not appropriate. But what it's got to do is it's got to get their attention early.
Yes.
And appeal to their sense of sensibility or self or community or purpose at the end.
Yes.
So that they can see the relevance as well as the intellectual, what am I mechanically going to learn or know? Because if we try and apply just, you'll learn about this, you'll know about this, we'll focus on this topic, then you've got logic-based things. And people don't people aren't driven by logic exclusively.
No.
As I said earlier, people know you should eat well, do lots of exercise. Almost no one does it. It's just, you know, it's knowing and doing are different things. And so we've got to appeal to both sides of the human brain in order to resonate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Signing off.
Thanks, Geraldine. Look, we're out of time. Sat, did you want to have any final words?
No, thanks, John. I think that was really interesting. Unless anyone else has any final comments, I think we'll probably have to wrap up the session.
No worries. No worries.
Either in the comments or if you'd like to unmute.
If you have any questions, post this. Let's say you're sleeping in the middle of the night, you wake up in the middle of the night, you go, oh, I should have thought about that for John. My email's on the screen now, so you can kind of ask me any sort of random insight that happens to come across your brainwaves over the next, I don't know, week or so, or beyond. But you can contact me there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of today's Monday Lunch Live workshop session. Thanks so much, Jon, for your insights. I'm sure everyone has come away from that having learned something new about how we can form an appropriate intention narrative for our audiences. Thanks for everyone involved, to the VCCC team, Cynthia, Erin, for your continued efforts in making sure this series is a huge success and ensuring that it flows smoothly every single week. And finally, thank you to the audience for tuning in and participating in the session today. And for your continued support of the VCCC programming, especially the MLL series. I would like to encourage everyone to check out the other events and stay signed up for what's happening in VCCC in 2021. That's it. Stay safe, take care everyone, and have a great week. Thanks, Jon.
See you later.